No, it won't be complete. We guarantee long blocks, so no drive accessories, no turbo, intake injectors, but that's pretty much it. You have reached Connect Towing and Wrecking. If you are looking for full-time employment and have salvage yard experience or strong automotive skills, please apply.
Looks mostly all there, I think.
Turn right, then the destination is on your right. The destination is on your right. Heights Hot Rod Shop.
Rear suspension row 4-link for the early Dodge Challengers and Barracudas. And you can buy this either on a full frame, without the frame. Well, I guess you can't buy it without the frame because of the C-notch, but as it sits here, you can cut the back half of the frame off about 3 inches behind the cab.
South wind at 10 to 20, increasing.
You're on the fastest route. You should reach your destination by 5:04 p.m.
Well, that's one way to get a drum off.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Differences. gosh, that's crazy. Unless it's... Oh, no way. It's the build sheet. It's just crumbling.
We might be able to piece it back together, though.
Oh. Oh, no. Just broke apart in my hand. It's like an archaeology find in here. There's nothing left of it. Goodbye, original build sheet.
Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, dun.
for the I think so.
Something went. Yeah, I heard that too. Did it change how it ran?
Yeah. Ah, it blew off the throttle body.